Welcome to the Association for Consulting Expertise webinar series. ACE is a non-profit association of professionals who provide an array of services to businesses and organizations based on the expertise of our members. We have a wide variety of members, from executive coaches to innovation consultants to accountants and attorneys. So if you're interested in learning more about ACE and potentially joining the association, please visit our website at www.consultexpertise.com. We've got a lot of material to cover today. This morning's speaker actually comes to us from our an association in Massachusetts called the Society of Professional Consultants. And today's webinar is about how to make prospect meetings success stories and not mystery novels. The idea here is you'll learn the mindset perspectives you must have if you're to be effective at executing a qualifying sales process, the 6 factors you must ask about that determine the rightness of fit, when to ask these questions and how to ask them, and the answers that you must hear, and why good qualifying is looking to disqualify your prospect, and how to win more business. Our presenter this morning is Carl Harvey. Carl is the principal at Success and Self-Esteem. He is the founder of Success and Self-Esteem. It's a sales development company that helps salespeople develop the skills, psychological competencies required for selling success, and helps companies and organizations develop the people, practices, and processes that support a sales culture of achievement and accountability. Carl is also the author of the book, What's Stopping You? Building the Confidence You Need to Succeed in Sales, the first book to integrate the science of psychology and the art of selling to provide powerful, proven techniques to achieve selling success. So with that, I'd like to turn it over to Carl. So Carl, if you could go ahead and share your screen.
Well, I want to begin by, first of all, thanking Terry and Priscilla for making my appearance here today possible. And I want to thank everyone who's on the webinar for taking time out of their schedules to sit in on this conversation. And I hope to prove the time well invested. Before we begin, though, just one request. I have a lot of material, as Terry mentioned, that I want to get out to you guys. And because of the time constraints, I ask that you hold your questions till the end. And then I'll do everything I can to answer all of them and in detail, where I wouldn't do that right now because I'd be concerned about time. Fair enough? So let's get started. So I've been running a sales development company for 17 years. And I've discovered there's a couple of reasons why consultants and salespeople aren't as successful as they could be. But one of the more fundamental ones is that many of us lack an effective sales qualifying process. We're not asking enough questions. We're not asking enough of the right questions at the right time and in the right way. And as a result of that, we're spending time and opportunities we really have no chance of winning, and even worse, losing opportunities we could have won if only we asked some more tougher, better questions. So given the ubiquitous nature of the problem, what I'd like to do in the time allotted is to outline a sales qualifying process with the hope of helping us win more opportunities and to leave early on those opportunities we have no chance of winning. So if we were going to do that, if we're going to start writing success stories, not mystery novels, there are 6 questions in front of you here that we must ask and get answers to. Now, these aren't all the questions you need to ask, but these are the sales fundamental questions you must ask if you're going to write a success story. So let's take a look at them. Does the prospect have a pain or a gain we can satisfy? If he has no pain and no gain, you shouldn't be there in front of him. You're not there to do a PowerPoint of all the things you have. You're not there to run down and tell him your bibliography of successes. If there's no pain or gain, you shouldn't be there. So that's what you're looking for. Number 2, it is important or urgent to fix the problem. Our prospects are dealing with a number of issues at any one time. If the problem we can fix isn't urgent or important, we risk it being put on the back burner, getting deprioritized. And not only does it go on the back burner, it might get knocked off the stove entirely. So we got to find out the urgency of the problem and why it needs to be fixed. What they're doing now isn't working, and they're committed to finding another solution. There's a centripetal pull for prospects to stay right where they are. No matter how bad things are going, they're risk averse, and they don't want to, no matter how bad it is, there's a tendency to stay right where they are. So if they're unhappy with the vendor, the tendency is to call the vendor in and give them a Last Supper talk, or if it's a process they're losing, making certain changes to that process, but to stay right where they are. A while back, one of my clients called me up. He's a vice president of a benefits company in Wilbraham, Mass. And he says, Carl, I've got a problem. I met with 3 prospects. They're not happy with the benefit provider. The guy doesn't come in and help them with enrollments. He says he never comes in, talks about compliance, and they never hear about the guy until it's time to renew the contract. And he says, I've been in there. I came back, I showed him everything we can do. I gave him a number of our clients they could call, that we've had a great success with. But at the end of the day, they called me yesterday and they said, I appreciate all your help, but we're going to stay with the guy we're with. What should I do? So I said, Daryl, what you need to do at this point is this. You need to set up an appointment to go out with them. And when you're out in front of them, what I suggest you do is review all the problems they've been having, A, B, C, D, and E, and then add this. If I promise to do a worse job than your current vendor, can I get your business? Well, when I said that to him, he laughed. When he said that to his 3 prospects, they laughed because he understood the foolishness of staying with someone who wasn't doing the job. But the point of the story illustrates the ferocious resistance people have for changing. So we got to find it out. Number 3, they have a budget for the project or they can pay for it. Pretty straightforward. No pay, no solution, no sale. Number 5, are we on a level playing field? And can we distinguish ourselves from our competition in a relevant and compelling way? Now, by level playing field, what I mean is this. If there is competition, the competition has no past successful relationship or special status with our prospect, such that we're in the back of the bus before we begin. We've got to find that out. And finally, do we understand the decision-making process of our prospects? Who, how, when, why? So a lot of consultants and a lot of salespeople, they're comfortable asking about who makes the decision, but they're not so comfortable about drilling in and finding out about the decision-making process. And oftentimes, sales are won or lost depending upon the criteria our prospects have. Okay? Now, in asking these 6 questions, there's 4 points we need to observe. 1, you've got to ask all these questions and get answers to them. Pretty straightforward. Don't assume that you know the answers. No mind reading. If our prospect hasn't said it, then you don't know it. Number 2, the answers we ask to these questions have to be positive. If we find that they don't have the money, or we find that the competitor has a great past success with them, we've got to put that problem on the table and deal with it now. Because if we don't do that, and we continue on with the sales call, now what's happening is you're no longer writing a success story, but a mystery novel, and it's going to turn into a tragedy, and you're going to be the protagonist. So it's critical that you find that out. And I'll share an example of that myself. Before I started my business, I was a national account manager with ADT Security Systems. And I was in charge of finding national companies that were headquartered in Massachusetts, but had offices or stores across the country. And I was also in charge of universities. Those are universities looking to put in access control, security camera systems. This one university wanted to put in a system-wide access control system on campus. And I met with a lead engineer who I thought was a lead engineer. And I asked him, I said, well, who have you used in the past for all of your security? And he said to me, we like to use local companies. Now, did I hear that? No, I didn't. So when he said that to me, I said to myself, but we're ADT. We're the largest company in the world. We protect more universities than any local company. And we have more engineering expertise than any local company. So I'm going to win this business. I don't care what the guy said. So I brought up one of our engineers. We took the guy out to lunch, great proposal. At the end of the day, he went to local company. So the point of all that, if you don't get positive answers to the questions, hear what they're telling you and be prepared to walk away. Now, what I should have done, which I didn't do, I should have said to the guy at the time, you know, John, I'm going to use John throughout all of this. So they have my clients do have different prospects, do have different names, but for simplicity of this, I'm going to use John. I said, John, let me ask you a question. You've had great success with local companies. In my experience, when that's the case, you tend to want to stay with them. Is there anything about the situation that would say that anything would change, that ADT would have a chance of winning your business? Now, if I'd asked that question back then, at that point in time, I could save myself weeks of working, taking the guy out to lunch, flying up engineers from Parsippany, and I would have known that we're going to go nowhere. So I got to get positive answers. Number 3, you have to ask the right questions at the right time in the right way. So for example, if too early on you ask the prospect about his budget, he may interpret that as an attempt to disqualify him before you even begin. Or if too early on you ask about the competition, he might hear you saying that you want to sell him instead of solving his problem. So we got to be careful when we ask these questions. And number 4, perhaps most critically, you need answers to all these questions before you make any proposal or do any presentation. There's nothing, you're not going to win business by trying to get this information after the fact. So this is one of the key of a good qualifying process. Get your answers up front, so you know what to be on. So now if we understand that, we've got to take these 6 questions though, if we want to ask them at the right time in the right way and put them in the context of a sales qualifying process. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So it's really 5 steps. Step 1, setting the stage and setting expectations. Step 2, what's the problem and why does it matter? Step 3, what have they done to fix it and what else are they considering? Step 4, are we a good fit? And step 5, always leave with a clear future. So let's go through these one at a time. So step 1 is setting the stage. So what happens here? Well, you can see these 4 things. So let's take a look at them. First, we always want to check for time. If we come in and we haven't checked for time, what we risk is this. Halfway through the conversation with your prospect, he interrupts you and he says, hey, can you wrap this up in a couple of minutes? I've got another meeting to go to. Or things are getting late. Hey, can we schedule a second meeting here? I've got to go. When he does that, the tendency for all of us will be to panic and we'll start spilling our jelly beans all over the counter. And I want to tell you, that's not going to win you business. One of my clients was out, took his salesperson out on a call. Now, I've been working with the salesperson. I had yet to work with the president. So they get to the meeting. The sales guy asked about time. He said to them, he says, you know, we talked about setting aside a half hour. Is that still going to work for you? And the prospect said, well, you know, listen, unfortunately, I've got another meeting that comes up that I have to go to. Can we get this done in about 15 or 20 minutes? Before the sales guy could say anything, his president interrupted and started launching in to a soliloquy about his company, all the great things they can do, all their customers, how they're going to take care of him. And of course, after the meeting, they never heard back from the prospect again. They never heard back because, quite frankly, they weren't credible. Because I've never heard of a situation where somebody went in and spilled their jelly beans in front of a prospect and won the business. So to avoid that, check for time. And how you do that is simply say, look, we talked about setting aside a half hour. Is that still going to work? If he says yes, go forward. If he says no, I got something else coming up, reply by saying, that's okay. We could do one or two things. We could either reschedule for a time when your schedule is more flexible, or we could begin, and when the time is up, if you've liked what you've heard so far, maybe you'll invite me in for part two. What would you like me to do? Let's check in for time. Bonding and rapport. Our prospects will tell us their deeper truths only to the extent that they trust us. And so right from the beginning, we want to start building that bridge of trust with them by bonding and rapport. Now, I'm sure all of us out there know how to do bonding and rapport. It's not a secret, but it's an important component of an effective sales process. So typically what I do when I meet with someone, I'm usually meeting with a president or a business owner, I will say something like, you know, I always like success stories. Would you mind me asking, how do you start this business and how you've been able to grow it to, you know, $5 million company that it is now? Can you tell me a little bit about that? People like talking about themselves, so they usually comply willingly. After the next step in that, I want to know what they want to get out of our meeting. So I ask them that. Excuse me. So John, before we begin, what are we hoping to get out of our meeting? Because I want to make sure we cover everything that's important to you. Now, what this question does, it does two things that are important. First of all, it signals the prospect that our conversation is not going to be an interrogation or even worse, a hostage situation. Do you know what I mean by a hostage situation? It's when the salesperson or consultant gets in there and for the next half hour, he doesn't shut up and keeps hectoring the guy and asking him to do the business. And so the prospect is forced to call a SWAT team in there to rescue him out of there. So we're signaling that. And we're also telling him it's going to be a conversation. And finally, we want to set up an upfront contract of what's going to happen during the call. One of the problems that we run into as consultants is that a lot of bad consultants and salespeople have preceded us. And so what they have done, once they've gotten in, they haven't shut up. They just talk about their product for the time allotted. They never ask any questions. And at the end of the day, the prospect gets rid of them by simply saying, let me think about this and I'll get back to you. And of course, nothing ever happens. So because of all these bad experiences, we want to let him know we're different. So we're going to do things a little bit differently. So after he tells me what he wants to get out of the meeting, I'm going to say something like, I want to do the same thing. Would this make sense? Let's just have a conversation. And this is going to involve me asking you a lot of questions about your situations, and you're going to have a lot of questions about me and how I do my business. And at the end, we can figure out where we go from here. I might conclude that I can't help you, or you might conclude for whatever reason that we're not a fit. And that's okay, but I want to make sure you'd be comfortable telling me no. Or we could find out that we have something to work together on and we can take a look at next steps. Would that be okay? So when he agrees with that, he knows two things. We're going to ask questions. I'm going to ask more than he is. I'm going to be doing 80% of the asking, he can do 20. And at the end, I'm going to expect him to tell me, is there a next step or isn't there? And that's okay. So he'll be comfortable telling me no, but he won't have to use evasive tactics to get rid of me. So this is the first stage that we have to do well. This is going to set the table for everything else that follows. So now we go on to step 2. We've done a good job here, and what happens here? Well, a couple things. First of all, we're going to find the pains and compelling reasons that the prospect wants to change. This is where we're going to drill in and find out, why am I here? Why does the guy want to do something different than he is doing now? What's compelling him to do that? So here, I have to find the pains, but more importantly, the compelling reasons, the urgency to fix this. What happens if he doesn't? And in doing that, I'm also going to learn to dig deeper. Now, why do I want to dig deeper? Well, there's two reasons. One is, the better I understand his problems and how it's affecting him or her, I can devise a more comprehensive and glove-fit solution. But there's another reason that's probably even more important. Prospects so much don't want to be liked they want to be understood. And if I can understand his pains and his issues better than anybody else, he's going to feel understood, and I'm going to come closer to him. That's how you build trust. He's going to feel understood, and he's going to want to work with me. Number 3, I want to see if I can quantify the problem. 2 reasons for that. If I can quantify the problem, it really demonstrates in dollars and cents what the problem is costing him. But it also sets the table if at the end of the call or when I come back with a proposal and he balks at the investment, I can now talk to him about comparing my investment with what the problem is costing him. And if I've done a good job in that and the problem, the solution is a 1 to 3, 1 to 10 solution, usually the prospect will see, hey, I should be paying the money in this. I got to fix this problem. This is not a bad situation. And finally, we want to make it personal, and we want to make it about the business. I have found in my experience that at the end of the day, most of the reasons somebody doesn't want to change or the problems they're having, the root of those problems is a personal issue. The anxiety, the worry, the upset, what he risks losing. We want to find out what that is. Because if we find out what that is and we address it, again, we have a better solution. And we want to make it about the company. What happens if this problem continues? Problems are not abstract. They live in the real world and they have real world implications. We need to find out about them. And so some of the questions we can ask, obviously these are just suggested questions and they're not all the questions, but you'll get an idea. So what I'll normally do when I'm ready to start asking questions, I says, can we pick up the conversation where we left off the phone when you, and the when you is when you're telling me about your issues. And I'm going to make very, very specific about what the issue was. And then we get going. The second question you see there, I think I understand. Could you tell me a little more? In the early 90s, I went back to school to study to be a psychotherapist. And what I learned was that when you're dealing with clients in a therapy situation, the first problem they give you usually isn't the real problem. And surprisingly, I found that's true in sales. Usually the first problem the prospect gives me isn't the real problem or the entire problem. And so what I want to do is I want to drill deeper, and this is a great question to do that. I think I understand, can you tell me a little bit more? And then you can ask this simple question, what is it about the problem that you want to address it now? Here's some other questions. What do you see happening if it continues? What is this costing you? How long has the problem been going on? How is it affecting your company? Those questions and the answers they give you are going to tell you, lay out just how compelling the problem is and what you need to do and the chances you have of turning this into a good winning opportunity. Okay. So if we've completed this step successfully, this is what we should now be in a position. We've started to write a success story, not a mystery novel. So we've set up an upfront contract. We're asking questions. He's answering them. He's going to give us a yes or no answer at the end. Yes or no meaning a next step or none. And now I'm drilling into the problem to find out how serious it is, how it impacts him, how it impacts the company, and digging deeper to understand how it's affecting him. So if I've done these questions successfully, then I can go on to the third step and find out what have they done to fix it. So here's what you've got to accomplish here. What have they done to fix the problem? If you ask the question, they tell you the problem, I'm always going to ask, what have they done to fix it? If they've done nothing to fix it, how serious of a problem can it be? If they've done something to fix it, I can ask, well, did it work? And then I can find out how well they've done there. Are they prepared to leave their current provider? If the problems are this bad, and I've shown that the solution they're doing now isn't working, how committed are they to leaving their present provider? Or if it isn't a provider, it's a solution, it's a computer system, or it's an IT solution. How committed are they to leaving that solution? And if there's competition, make sure you're on a level playing field. This is where we're going to find out about competition. And let's take a look at some questions you can ask at this stage. When you complain to your provider, what happened? If not, how come? Did it work? Given all these issues, are you prepared to leave your current vendor, or do you feel he deserves another chance? And of course, if he says he deserves another chance, you can ask the question, well, help me understand something. For the last 6 months, he hasn't been doing anything for you. Why would you want to give him another chance? He certainly hasn't been showing the loyalty to you that you're giving to him. Or besides us, who else are you considering? Now, if there's competition, this is a question that should kind of unearth this. So when he tells you, yeah, we're looking at a couple of other companies, you ask him, may I ask who they are? And he'll tell you. He should tell you. And that's a problem if he doesn't, by the way. He'll tell you who they are. And I don't care how bad the companies were. I don't care if they're the worst companies in your industry or in your business, you're always going to say, great companies. Why them? Or you can say, great companies, but there's several other companies in the area that do the same thing. How come these guys? And they're going to tell you why they chose them. Now, the reasons for them should be innocuous. They might just say, I've heard of these guys. I've seen them in the area. One of my friends has used them before. I thought I'd give them a chance. None of those answers put you at risk of losing the opportunity. But if he says to you, well, you know, my past company, I brought these guys in and they did a fantastic job. I want to see if they can help me here. Now you've got a problem. And like I said, with every problem that you have, you've got to stop and you've got to put the problem on the table. Don't think you're going to get lucky by ignoring it. When you ignore a problem, hoping to get lucky, you're going to end up in Hope Island. And Hope Island is a fast track to Death Valley. So if the guy tells you he's got, you know, have a great experience with somebody else, you've got to put that problem on the table and ask him, you know, what chance do I have of winning this? Or put more precisely, sounds like you had great experience with this other vendor. All things being equal, you're going to go with them. That's what I would do. What about this situation would suggest a different outcome? And listen to the answer. And if the answer isn't what you wanted to hear, then you've got to leave. And you've got to just leave friends, and if things change, you'll be open to helping them. So if you've done these 3 steps successfully, what have you done? You found a problem. You've determined its urgency. You found out that you're on a level playing field. You found out what they're doing now isn't working. And you've determined that they're committed to doing something. Oh, it doesn't necessarily mean do something with you. But at least you're still writing a success story right now, and you can move forward to the 4th phase. And this is, are we a good fit? And the question here is, this is an issue of, we're going to talk about budget, and we're going to talk about decision-making process. Now, there's a lot of roads the decision-making process can take, depending on the complexity of the sale. If the guy has a partner, if it's got to go up the line, if the person in front of you is just an information gatherer, an influencer, but not the decision maker. So there's a lot of different permutations to it. So what I'm going to do today, for the sake of time, I'm going to use my process, because usually I'm in front of a decision maker, and I know it is. And then during the question and answer, if you want me to elaborate on a more elaborate decision-making question and strategy, I'd be more than willing to do that. And the same thing with money and budget. So when I talk about, so what I'm going to do after I find out that step 3 is going in the right direction, I'm going to stop and sum up everything I've heard so far. I'll say something like, hey, John, could I sum up what I've heard so far? Right now, your sales guys are not meeting the numbers. You're worried that your corporate office is going to be looking at you to make changes with you if you don't turn this around. And you haven't had a whole lot of success finding salespeople, and you haven't had a whole lot of success of getting these guys to do what's necessary to start bringing in more business. Is there anything I've missed, or anything you think we should add? And hopefully they'll say, no, it's pretty much on track. Great. So now I'm going to ask them about the budget. I'm going to explain my process to you, John. But before I do that, I want to make sure that we're on the same page here. If you were comfortable with what you hear in a few minutes, would you be willing to invest $30,000 to help fix this problem once and for all? If he says yes, then I'm going to go forward and I'll begin explaining my process. If I hear no, oh, that's a lot of money, we don't have that, then what I will do, as we will see here, is if they ever, and this is a good question to ask at any stage when they talk about money, if you've quantified the problem, I'm confused. You've been spending X thousands of dollars and the problem isn't fixed, but you don't want to spend minus X to fix it. Can you help me understand that? So I'm out at an insurance company a while back. 3 guys I'm producing. The principal of the company, the owner, wasn't a strong owner. So he's kept him on board for 4 years. He's invested $500,000 in terms of salaries and commission, and he's gotten about $300,000 back in revenue. That certainly is a winning hand. Because when I met him, I suggested we just fire the 3 of them and start fresh, but he wasn't comfortable doing that. So when I told him what it was going to cost to work with me, he said, well, that's a lot of money. And I said, Rob, I guess I'm confused. You've spent $500,000 on these 3 guys, and they have brought you less, not even close to paying for themselves yet, but you don't want to spend $30,000, $40,000 to fix this problem. Can you help me understand that? And he said, you know what, you're right about that. I didn't look at it that way. Oftentimes that will be enough to address the budget question. And then if you're turning to a decision-making process, most of the time I'm dealing with the decision maker, but if I had to, if I didn't know who I was dealing with and I wanted to check, and I would ask something like, Don, besides yourself, who else has a say in this? And suppose he mentions someone that isn't there. So I'll ask him, well, would it make sense for us to invite him in to join us? And if he says to me, well, no, I'm the guy that does all this, he's kind of the silent partner. And I go, okay. So will you run this by him? Yes. When you run by stuff like this, the last 10 times you did, how many times did he just agree with your assessment of what you wanted to do? He said he agrees with me most of the time. He says, okay. In the rare cases when he doesn't agree with you, why doesn't he? Well, he might ask me, did I get the best price? Or he might say, am I sure this guy can do the job? And I say, well, from what we've talked about, what will you tell him on each of those issues about my price and my process? And then you hear him. That's how you have to drill in that. And then I'll ask him at the end, if there was somebody else, I'll say, if the 2 of you disagree at the end, who wins? You've got to find that stuff out before you go any further. If you've developed a decision-making process and you find out about budget, you're writing a success story. So in many cases, you guys got to come back, and gals have got to come back with a proposal. But now you know what you have to put in the proposal. And what you should put in the proposal should be very simple. Your proposal should be no more than 2 pages. It should lay out the problems he's having, and it should lay out what it's costing him in terms of aggravation, money, and then beside it, put your solution. That's all. Forget all the preamble and all the blah, blah about your company and all your great stuff. Put that there. It's succinct, it's to the point, and he can grasp it. That's what your solution should look like. At this point, then, the last step in the process, if you've got to go back and write a proposal, always have a clear future of what you're going to do. What's going to happen next? So if I'm going to write a proposal, and I'm going to come back and present it, before I leave, I'm going to say something like this. You've given me a lot of information. I'm going to work hard to put together a solution that makes sense to you. When I come back, what objections do you have for giving me a yes or no answer after you look at my proposal? And you're going to hear how committed he is to doing it. If when you come back, he likes what you have to say, and for example, he wants some references, same process will be applied here. How many do you want to talk to? What would you like to ask him so I can give you the right references? And if you like what you hear, what do you see happening next? Don't be giving out references without a clear future of what's going to happen next. And the final point I can make here is, on a sales call, I mentioned look to disqualify the opportunity. So one way you do that is look for yellow lights. That's indications the sales call is not going in the right directions. So here are some of them right here. Prospect doesn't agree to an upfront contract. Prospect seems distracted or too busy. Prospect appears bored. There's no serious problems or issue. He's not unhappy or sufficiently unhappy with his present provider. Prospect has pain but no urgency to fix it. Prospect has a good past experience with your competition. Prospect isn't a decision maker. All these are signs that the call isn't going in the right direction. When this happens, you've got to stop and you've got to put the problem on the table and ask the prospect what he wants to do. And in doing this, it's not done belligerently, it isn't done aggressively, it isn't done in a defiant mood. It's done in a very soft, nurturing fashion. So let's take the first one, because this happened to me a couple of weeks ago. I was out in front of a prospect, and I tried to set up the upfront agreement that we're going to ask each other questions. And he said to me, listen, I just want to know about your process, what sort of selling system you use, what are you going to do to help grow my sales team. I don't need to be answering a whole lot of other questions. And so I said to him, I understand that. Though when I work with someone right from the beginning, I work with them as a partner. And this means we have an open exchange of information right from the beginning. But it sounds like you're not okay with that. And that's okay, but it tells us we're probably not a good fit, in which case we should probably end a conversation here. Now, what would you like me to do? At this point, he got mad at me. He says, well, I don't like your attitude. We're going to end it right here. I said, okay. And we parted friends. Now, truthfully, I've never had success with people that I come in here and they're reading me the riot act before we even start the conversation. But that's an example of how you stop and you walk away, as opposed to giving in to his bullying, leaving the call a weaker salesperson and still not winning the business. So that's kind of the layout. Setting expectations early, finding out what problems they're having, finding out what they've done to fix it, see if you're a good fit by checking for budget and decision-making process, always have a clear future, and look for yellow lights. And I'm going to guarantee you, if you do these things consistently and effectively, you will win more opportunities, and you will leave opportunities early on that you have no chance of winning. Thank you. And I guess that's it for me. And Terry, are there any questions, or did I answer them all during the presentation?
Well, let's give people a chance to type in questions into the chat box. Okay, so Carl, great presentation. Thank you very much. Particularly up front, one of the things that I heard that was particularly interesting was the tendency for people to stay where they are no matter what. Can you talk a little bit more about that? Because as I mentioned before, in my business, I work with companies a lot of the time that are stuck in some place, unable to meet their goals, but I've seen this happen where they're reluctant to actually make the change, even though they're frustrated by not meeting their goals.
Okay, so that's a good question. So as I mentioned before, there's a ferocious tendency to stay right where they are because they're risk averse. And so one of the things I suggest, I don't believe in lecturing people. It doesn't work. Remember, it's all about self-discovery, the prospect self-discovery. So when the person isn't moving off the dime, I'm going to ask them, well, can you tell me, what's this costing you in terms of anxiety and heartache, and what's it costing your business that you're not moving forward? How much money do you think you're losing? And is that okay? You okay with that? What sort of business goals do you have, and is this preventing you from reaching them? So my purpose of doing that, Terry, by asking those type of questions, is to make real to him what he's losing. And then I can ask him the questions. Well, losing all this, are you okay if continue on as you are? Or are you open to looking to an alternative that can help you fix these problems once and for all? That's the kind of questions that I would ask. But what I don't do, I don't lecture them. I don't tell him that he needs to do anything. He doesn't need to do anything. The perspective that I use is always about self-discovery. He has to discover for himself what it's costing him personally and in his business, and is that self-discovery on his part sufficient for him to want to do something different? And if it is, we have an opportunity to keep talking. If it isn't, then we're DOA. But that's not a problem either. We still win.
Right. So once again, to everybody out there in Zoom webinar land, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat window. And Carl's been gracious enough to spend a few more minutes with us to answer any questions you might have. I also enjoyed the comment about Hope Island is the fast track to Death Valley.
It is.
Reminds me that hope is not a strategy.
That's right, it isn't. Too many people, too many consultants and salespeople are using that as a strategy, and it doesn't work. And the other thing I'll just add as a comment here, when I say you've got to be able to distinguish yourself from your competition, you will distinguish yourself from your competition in two ways. By the great questions you ask, by asking questions, not telling them about what you do. So when I'm in front of someone, I never tell them about what I do until those 6 questions have been answered. So I'm not there to do me world talk. I'm there to help them. Remember, prospects will change what they're doing, not because your product or service is good, better, or best, but because they have a problem. It's important to fix it. What they're doing now isn't working, and they're committed to finding a solution. So that's what you focus on. So you asking questions, you'll stand out from your competition. And then if your solution is a glove fit, then you have a good chance of getting the business.
Okay, we have a question from Carrie Yardley. Do you employ value-based pricing in your consultancy? If so, what are the factors you consider in establishing the value?
That's a good question, Carrie. No, I pretty much have a coach, and I've had some of the best sales training out there, and I know the prices that typically they've been using, and I will model my pricing around that. And that's what I do. So it's not value-based pricing. I know what my services are worth based on the marketplace and based upon what people do just like I do out there, and I'm going to price it accordingly. And again, also it's priced on the severity of the problem I'm fixing. How many salespeople am I working with? How good are they? How long is it going to take to fix the problem? Those will be factors in either charging more or charging less. Hope that's helpful.
Okay. And we have a question from SHEM. When service is expert knowledge or practice consulting, client doesn't know about the discipline and depth of the field. This assumes his or her people or more novice vendors can meet the need. How do you present the differentiation?
Would you say the question again? I'm not clear. I'm not understanding it.
Yeah, I'm not exactly clear either. So, the service you're providing is expert knowledge, and the client doesn't know that discipline in depth, but the client assumes that his or her people or more novice vendors can meet the need. How do you create the differentiation between yourself and the competition, essentially?
Okay, so that's a great question. So one of the things you've got to do is one of the things that's pretty effective is you've got to try to use the wedge on them. You can't go in there and start bad trashing the competition. So one of the things you can do is, now I'm going to use my own experience because I don't know this guy's business. So when I'm in with someone and they've got competition, or even if it's an in-house solution. So there was a guy that wanted some help hiring a salesperson. And he told me, he says, listen, I got to be honest with you. Robert Half, it's a company, I guess it's a placement company. They're in my networking group, and I'm thinking about using them too. So I'm between you and them. I says, that's great. I said, to give you an idea, help you compare the two of us. Let me ask you this: when he talked about the sales assessment they were going to use to make sure that the candidates they're looking at could really execute your selling strategies, and also pointed out the current skill sets as hunter, qualifying, closer, were you happy with that? And he goes, no, he didn't mention anything about a sales assessment. Okay, that's all right. When he talked about the selling system that he was going to introduce to the new hire, so he could put everybody in the same page in your company, so they're both, using the, everybody's seeing with one set of eyes and using one, music sheet. Were you comfortable with that process was going to work for you? Oh, he hasn't mentioned anything about that. Okay, let's put that aside for a second. When he talked about onboarding, when you got a new guy and they're going to onboard him, were you happy with the onboarding process he was going to use to ensure he was going to ramp up an optimal time to give you return on your investment. He didn't mention anything about onboarding. So I knew after those 3 questions that I threw Robert half in front of the bus and he got hit. So, and so what I did is I threw him in the bus. So the answer to your question is this: it's called the wedge. And what you do is you ask questions that something that you do, and you know your competition does it, but you say it in a way assuming that he does it or they do it. So you're not trashing him. So when he does this, how does that work for you? Or when he told you about this process to filter this out, were you happy with that? And what you're hoping here is he never talked about that. I've never heard anything about that. And you don't have to say anything more. The guy got hit by the bus. Okay.
And in general, how do you go about getting that information concerning your competition? That was actually a follow-on question from Carrie. But
okay, so I'm going to ask them. I'm just going to ask them. What I'm going to do is I'm going to say to them, besides us, who are you looking at? And they'll say, well, I'm looking at, Carrie is, I think, a lawyer, and there might be some lawyers there. And I says, oh, the great firms. How come what prompted you to pick them? Because there's a lot of other law firms out there. And so, Carrie, what I want to hear when I ask that question is, why those lawyers? Why not somebody else? There's got to be a reason. It doesn't really have to be an important reason, but there has to be a reason. And then if I find out that they say, well, I think they have expertise in an area that we need, that's why I've called them in, then you've got an idea of why they're calling in there. And then you've got to ask yourself, do I have that expertise? Okay, you can't tell them not to invite them in, but then what you'll do when you meet with them in person, you're going to test that expertise by asking some questions that you hope that those fellow lawyers can answer satisfactorily by wedging them. I hope is that helpful? If it isn't, just write in the bottom of the screen, no, it's not, shut up. Or
I think it's helpful because it is interesting that you can get quite a bit of information about your competition by asking your potential clients about your competition.
Yeah, you can. Yeah, it's the funniest thing. I'll tell you a quick aside. So I'm coaching this CFO who runs a transportation company, and he's going to be taking over the business. And he told me last time I was with him that they needed bring in somebody to do some 401k administrative work. I know it's a software package and whatnot. He said he had 3 different companies come in, and each of the salespeople that came in, they spent the time trashing the other competition, and all they did is they talked about himself. He said, they didn't ask one question of me when they were in there. See, unfortunately, that's how you can stand out. Now, as consultants, I think we do a lot better job. Where I think we're more mature, more senior, more accomplished. But it shows you that a lot of people don't ask questions, and what happens if we start asking questions, boy, do we stand out in a positive vein.
Interesting. So a reminder to everybody that's still out there that the chat window is open, and more questions we have time for a few more questions. We do have one from Chem again, that the previous response was helpful. The problem is a lack of knowledge about the expertise offered and the value of this depth of expertise. Design, facilitation, change progress, projects, mission critical meetings, large group planning summits. So I guess if you don't know your competition or you don't know what's being offered in a lot of detail, sometimes it's difficult to do that differentiation. But I took it from your previous answer that it's all about diving into what they think about your competition and what the competition has told them. Is that correct?
No, I mean, only if I think what his question is that the customer believes they've got expertise to do what this guy can do. But the guy asking the question, I'm sorry, I didn't hear your name. The expertise that you have is more detailed, it's more sophisticated, more powerful than what the novice can do. But the decision maker doesn't understand that. Is that in essence what the question is?
I believe so.
Yes, he said. Okay. All right. Yeah, that's a tough one. So one way of approaching it is to find out what they are doing that hasn't been successful and ask the question, Do you understand why your guys haven't been able to do X, Y, or Z for you? And then the guy says, no, I don't. Well, would this be helpful? And then you kind of lay something out for them. So I'll give you an example from my world. Maybe this will be helpful. So I always use sales assessments because I'm not there to fail, and I want to make sure that the people I'm working with can succeed. If they're not seriously committed or they're too weak, then it's probably we're wasting everybody's time. So if a guy says to me, I'm working with someone, and he said to me, you know, well, we don't like using sales. Why would you want to bother using sales assessments? You know, we can make better decisions than that. And I said, well, let me ask you a question. You haven't had a whole lot of success hiring people. They come in, they don't work out. Do you have any idea why that might be occurring? And I said, well, maybe we're just choosing bad people. I says, okay, but you know why you're choosing bad people? And I says, well, maybe we need to do something different. Well, maybe you do. And one of the things you may want to think of doing is using a test that's going to tell you they're bad people before they even come in the door. So that's how I would approach the problem with that question there. Do you know the question? So I'm giving you the question. Do you know why your guys aren't doing this? Do you know why this isn't happening? Do you know why you're running into stone walls here? And hopefully he says no. And then at that point, then it's a good point that you can introduce some of your expertise. Does that make sense?
Made sense to me.
Okay. I hope it makes sense to the guy asking the question.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you. Okay. Is that Al or all? Oh, all panelists. I guess they all asked the question at one. Oh, it's Shem. Okay. Good.
So Andrea has a comment and then a follow-on question. Her comment was, even if you don't know your competition, be curious. You'll get more info on your competition and what they're bringing to the table. It's worth it.
Absolutely.
And her follow-on question is, what do you say when they tell you that if they disagree with the decision maker wins? Do you insist on the decision maker being in the room for the next meeting?
All right, say that again. It's a good question. I want to go into that. The question again.
Yeah. What do you say when the person you're talking to tells you that if they disagree with the decision maker wins? Do you insist on the decision maker being in the room for the next meeting?
Yeah, you have to do that. You're dead if you don't. You're DOA. You're DOA. So what you do with someone, so if the person in front of you, let's say she's an influencer. So what that means is she can say no, but she can't say yes. Only the decision maker can. So I'll find that. I says, I appreciate you working with me. In terms of making this decision, what's the process you use? And she'll say, well, I look at it and then I go back to my boss and I make a recommendation. And I say, well, what's your role in this? Are you a decision maker or are you an influencer? I'm an influencer. I says, okay, that's great. And when you present your solution, how many times does he go with your solution out of every 10? Most of the time. So it's usually more than that. It's usually not as much, but you say most of the time. And it's rare times she doesn't. What does she disagree with? And she'll tell you, and then you lay out, well, from what we've said, what are we going to, from what I've said, what are you going to tell them? Now, if she says to you, if he doesn't like what I see, we lose it, then I says, well, this makes sense. Now, sometimes you can insist upon being in front of the decision maker, but you've got to do this up front. So it would sound something like this. This is how I work. I'm going to spend time putting together the proposal, but when I come back, it's important that I present my solution to you and the decision maker. And what I like to do, if you want to be comfortable, I come back and I present it to you. And if you think it makes sense, would you be open to setting up a second meeting so the three of us can get together? That's the question I would ask. Because sometimes she doesn't want to agree to bring you in to her boss because she doesn't know what you're going to say to, if you got in there. It could be another hostage situation. And then after that gets over with, there's going to be a lynching. Okay, the hostage situation you're going to create, the lynching he's going to create on the influencer. So he might be reluctant to do that. So what you're going to do is this is what you say to him. This is how I work. You got to be if it's important, this is how I work. At some point, I need to get in front of the decision maker with you. How do you want to do that? I can come back in and I can show you my proposal, but now let you keep it. And if you like it, maybe we could schedule a second meeting and the three of us can get together. What would work best for you? That's the question you ask, and you stand firm on it.
Got
Is
it.
that helpful to whoever asked the question? Was that helpful? If it isn't, tell me. I just won't talk to you again, but it was helpful.
Well, while they're deciding if that was helpful, we have
Yes. Okay, good. Thank you.
we have one more question from Carrie, which was, clients are oddly reluctant to say who else they are talking to. Are there
Okay.
strategies to get at the basis for the client's comparison?
Yes, there are. That's a great question. Very good question. Yes. You give them a reason. That's a very good question because you're dealing with, I used to find in the security field, when they didn't want to tell you who the competition was, you were just being used as a check bid. That's what I found. So I caution you on that. They just need to get a couple of quotes. So what I say to them is, I say, can you, besides, you got some other people, can you share who they are? We don't want to do that. Well, do you mind me telling you why I ask? For you to make an informed decision about who to go with, you need to understand the specific differences between me and the other people you're looking at. And the best persons to do all of that is each of the competition, because we know our competition and they know us. Does that make sense? And that's the purpose of me asking. And then if she says, or they say no to that, then I'm going to say, I guess I've got a concern. In my experience, when I put something out like that and they don't want to share the information, there's usually a reason that they're not sharing with me. And it usually is because it sounds like I'm going to be used as a check bid. And I don't play like that. So tell me what you'd like me to do. That's exactly what I would say to them. Does that make sense to everybody?
Yeah, I think that was great. And I think we're coming up on our time limit. I want to be respectful of everybody's time. And Carl, I want to thank you so very much for sharing this wisdom with us and helping us all develop our professional capabilities as independent service providers. So once again, this is the continuing ACE webinar series, trying to promote how we develop our professional capabilities. And if you're curious about joining ACE, you can discover all the benefits of membership at the ACE website, www.aceelevates.com. And as well as our sister organization in Massachusetts, the Society of Professional Consultants. I know that Rick and Carl and everybody down there would welcome anybody who's interested in joining that organization as well. So once again, thank you, Carl. And
thank you, Terry, and thanks to Priscilla. Thank you. Thank you, Judy.